Imagine starting your day by stepping barefoot into a vat of week-old urine and dog poop. Well, this is pretty much the daily reality of a medieval tanner. During the Middle Ages, society relied on tons of skilled professions, but there weren't really as many that were quite as filthy as this. I wanted to do a little series that looked into some of the real jobs that really made the medieval world work. I'm going to be using Kingdom Come Deliverance too to kind of actually be able to show what these jobs looked like as well. I wanted to start off with the tanner because even during the time they were looked down upon, and I'll be getting into the reasons why later. And I feel like a lot of people, even though they might know what a tanner does, they don't really know the process of what they do. So I decided to start the series off to kind of give them a little shout out, I guess. So to start off, what is a tanner? Well, there's someone who takes hides and they turn them into leather. But before they could even get to work, Before they could even get to work, they actually needed to get the hides. Where did they get the hides from? Most hides came from butchers, actually. And you can imagine, there's probably not really any short supply of this. There's always leftover hides from cows and goats, pigs, sheep. But they also had other sources. Hunters and nobles sometimes provided rare hides like deer and boar, and you can see, here's a deer right here. Some other sources were markets and fairs. A lot of monasteries and large manors actually raised animals themselves, so they would sell the skins from their animals to the tanner. And probably the worst source was actually during wars. Tanners might scavenge hides from some of the battlefield animals. So you can imagine if a horse died on the battlefield, some tanners might even go and take their hide and, process it and sell it. So now that you got your hide, what do you do next? So basically, at this point, tanners would dump them into lime water, or just stagnant water, really. So you can see them right here. And they let them sit for several days, really. What this did, it broke down the hair and it loosened any of the remaining tissue. You can imagine letting rotting hides sit in water like this would be pretty terrible. This actually would cause the water to rot, the hides would stink, and working around them is actually dangerous for your health. Before we get too far, let's talk a bit more about why tanners were actually looked down on. It was beyond just the smell. In the Middle Ages, people believed in something called the miasma theory. It was the idea that bad air, especially air that was filled with rotting smells, caused disease. People back then didn't really understand germs yet, so if something stank, it wasn't just unpleasant, they really thought it was dangerous. Keeping that in mind, you can imagine that if you were someone living back then and you walked past the tanner's workshop, you'd be smelling rotting flesh, that stagnant water, dog poop, fermented urine, animal fat melting in the sun. People really thought that this kind of air would just make you sick. Tanners weren't just seen as gross, they were actually kind of feared. That fear kind of bled into how they were treated. Tanners often lived and they worked outside the city walls or downstream from water supplies. In some towns, their homes and shops were legally required to be placed far away from everyone else. When it came to things like religion, marriage, or public life, they were often left out or looked over. There's even evidence that tanners had a hard time joining guilds in certain places, or they were grouped into lower social tiers. Their work was essential really, but their status was kind of questionable in the eyes of society. It's really wild to think about it, because without tanners you wouldn't have armors, saddles, shoes, or books. I mean, imagine a knight riding a horse without a saddle. What's ironic is even though they were covered in filth, they were some of the most skilled workers in the whole town. Tanning was really a precise and long process, but none of it really mattered when people thought your job was making them sick just by standing near you. A little fun fact as well, this is actually why you see plague doctors with their mask. The inside of the mask, inside of the beak, they actually put dried flowers like roses and carnations or different herbs like lavender and peppermint. The purpose of this was actually to keep away the bad smells, and they thought that by doing this they would not get sick. You can see here, so here we are at the tanner, and you can see this is the closest town. You can tell that Warhorse Studios really cares about historical accuracy. The map in the game, it's not just for show, it's based on the real 15th century Bohemia, with the towns and the roads, landscapes. It's placed pretty much exactly where everything would have been, and you can see that even here with the tannery being placed over here. Okay, well, let's get back into the actual tanning process. After the hides are done soaking, you can actually see the tanner over here. He would take this tanning knife and he'd use it to scrape off any of the remaining flesh or the hair. So after the hides are done being scraped, this is kind of where it goes from bad to worse. The next part is known as baiting, which is where you take the hides and you soak them in tubs full of fermented urine or dog feces. So the ammonia in the urine and the enzymes and the dog feces, they worked together to actually soften the hide apparently. And as you could see a minute ago, he was actually stirring it, but this wasn't the only way that it was done. Tanners often walked or stomped on the hides inside the vats, and this kneaded the solution deeper into the material. So as you can imagine, this is pretty terrible, really. So after you soaked your hide in your fermented urine and dog feces, the actual tanning would take place. Tanners would create something called tannins, which is where they actually get their name from. These tannins were extracted from oak bark, chestnuts, or gallnuts. The function of the tannins was to preserve the hide, and it transformed it into a more usable leather. During this stage, the hides would soak for weeks or even months, depending on the thickness and the purpose. Soaking the hides this long allowed the tannins to bond with the collagen in the hide, which made it tough, flexible, and resistant to rot. Finally, the hides would be removed from the tannins. From here, they'd be stretched, dried, and they'd be worked to be made soft. This is really where the work of the tanner ends. After this, they'd give the leather to cobblers, armor smiths, things like that. From there, they'd be transformed into shoes, boots, belts, armor, book bindings, saddles, reins, etc. So really, that's kind of it. That's the day of the life of a medieval tanner. It was not really glamorous work, but it was absolutely essential for medieval life. Next time you think about any sort of leather item from the Middle Ages, or, you know, see something in a museum, a movie, book, whatever, now you can actually think about the process that the tanners went through to make the item. Once you think about this, it kind of just puts everything into a different perspective. If you want to learn about some different medieval jobs, I'm going to do some other videos in the future. I'm planning on looking at, you know, the blacksmith, cobbler, scribe, thing like that. If there's any other ones you can think of, you guys can let me know in the comments. But until then, you know, like, subscribe, hit that bell like everyone always says, whatever. Oh my god, that's cringe. Anyways, yeah, I will see you guys later. Thanks for watching.